So today's December 22nd, on earth that is in heaven. So the topic of our sermon is God wants to build the kingdom of heaven on earth. Some people think that God wants to build the kingdom of heaven in the spirit world. He's going to destroy and burn and crash and wreck everything on earth, and then we'll just have a brand new planet. But God isn't a destroyer. He is a builder. And Jesus' idea is to build the kingdom of heaven on earth. That's why the Our Father prayer is, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven, right? So that's what God is doing. So I thought we'll try and show you evidence, make evidence of this so that your atheistic friends, you know the answers when they do that. So here's, I'm Pastor Frank. I guess our church thinks I'm a reverend, but I think I'd just rather be a pastor. And this is my family. This is all the kids that God has blessed me with. And that is a blessing. This is Madeline, our youngest one. So this is, by the way, interestingly enough, this is yesterday, could be today, 1:22 a.m. So this morning was the winter solstice. Now, interestingly enough, this is prehistoric rocks. Right? Nobody was around to write anything about why they made those rocks, except we know that the rocks are centered on the winter solstice. Did you know that? Isn't that interesting? That they understood when the winter solstice would be and built all these giant rocks weighing 30 tons, brought them there to honor the winter solstice. Isn't that amazing? Because the winter solstice, since prehistory, the winter solstice has been a significant time in many cultures because it's like this is the shortest day, the most wintry day, and then from now on the days get longer and longer, and finally summertime, springtime comes, and then summertimes, right? So it's like sort of like the beginning of the rebirth experience for the planet. If you're a farmer, you're very well aware of this, right? So I thought we should really appreciate all cultures. By the way, all cultures. The Machu Picchu has a winter solstice rock. Karnak in Egypt had a winter solstice rock. They all somehow understand this winter solstice and build these giant stone monuments to it. Interesting. Now, we don't do that, but we do make snow people. In the rest of the country, people are making snow people to honor the winter solstice. Like this is the mailbox snowman. See, that's a mailbox. And that's a snowman. And then they also make snowman ghosts. Did you know that? Snowman ghosts. And they also make, so this is people who actually live in real winter. Like Southern California, we think this is winter, right? No, it's not. How about the hungry snowman? The hungry snowman. And then also they make hungry dinosaur snowmen. That's a good one, huh? And then they make do-it-yourself snowmen. So this is do-it-yourself snowmen building materials, free building materials. Okay, so that's just fun. It's interesting that people do such interesting things with snow. We don't even know what snow is here, right? We don't even know what it is. Okay, always we love Christmas. The whole world loves Christmas, except there's a group of Grinches who don't like Christmas, and they think it's a myth, right? They hate Christmas, Christmas trees, your delusion. They think you're all crazy, but it's not crazy, and I'm going to make that point today. So they always say, it's a myth. For the season celebrate reason, and these are American atheists, reasonable since 1963 at atheist.org. So they don't believe in God or religion or anything like that. Nevertheless, and they always question the evidence of whether Jesus lived or not. Did anybody really know Jesus? How can we know that it's true, etc.? So I'm going to show some things. Amazingly, atheists deny the facts of history and the intervention of the Spirit of God and the spiritual growth of humanity. And that's what sort of like drives you crazy. How can you deny it? And I'll show you some of these things. So we say Jesus is still alive and more powerful than you can possibly imagine, and people don't get it. Atheists really don't get it, but they always lose. This is Acts 9, the Damascus Road. Saul becomes converted. And this will be the beginning of several stories. Then Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked for letters from him to the synagogues of Damascus, so if he found any who were the way, whether men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. What this means is there's already Christians in Damascus witnessing, and so he's going to go to find them because he's anti-Jesus. He's anti-Jesus. But what happens is, as he journeyed, he came near Damascus, and suddenly a light shone around him from heaven. Then he fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And he said, Who are you, Lord? And the Lord said, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. It is hard for you to kick against the goads. So I thought I'd give you the dictionary definition of what is a goad. Okay. A spike stick used for driving cattle. As we'll see, Jesus will use goads to force the Pharisee Saul to move in God's direction. Saul refuses to understand he's hurting. So the idea of kicking against the goads was in Israel, when they were getting the animals to move somebody, they would have a sharp stick and they would poke them. Where would they poke them, do you think? In the buttocks. So then they would kick, try to kick the stick away. Yeah. See, that's what he's saying. Paul, I'm trying to convince you to do God's will, but you keep fighting me every chance I get. So this is what happens. So we think one of the important elements of Christianity is Jesus appears to St. Paul, convinces him to follow Jesus, and Paul makes a gigantic difference in the New Testament. Ananias baptizes Saul. Now there was a certain disciple at Damascus named Ananias, and to him the Lord said in a vision, Ananias. And he said, Here I am, Lord. So the Lord said to him, Arise and go to the street called Straight, and inquire at the house of Judas for one called Saul of Tarsus, for behold, he is praying. And in a vision he has seen a man named Ananias, coming in and putting his hand on him that he might receive his sight. So these are appearances by Jesus to these people, Ananias and St. Paul. So this is because Paul was visited by Jesus Jesus is a life-giving spirit. And Paul says, Jesus taught me. Peter didn't teach me. James didn't teach me. John didn't teach me. Jesus himself taught me. That's very interesting, isn't it? Right? Is that possible? For he says in Galatians, For I neither received it from man, nor was I taught it, but it came through the revelation of Jesus Christ directly to me. So this is something we want people to believe and understand. Jesus can appear and does appear to people on a regular basis, and we have evidence for that. Number one, Paul. So there is irrefutable evidence of St. Paul's conversion experience. St. Paul testified at the cost of his imprisonment, beatings, and finally his life that Jesus Christ came to him as a life-giving spirit. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. So many people can deny that, but it's not true. And beyond Paul, Jesus appeared to many other people. Even the people in this room. Some of us have met Jesus. I met Jesus, and I believe that was absolutely true. Sidel met Jesus. And more importantly, lives have been changed, raised up from misery to glory. Right? So, is there any historical evidence that Paul was a real person? Yeah, there's hundreds of people who met him. Evidence for the reality of Paul comes from the dozens of writers who quoted him within a generation of his death. Every single Christian source agrees that he was a real person. Clement mentioned Paul in AD 95. Peter mentioned Paul in his epistles. Ignatius, Polycarp, and many other late 1st century and early 2nd century writers mentioned Paul because they knew him. He trained many of these people. He trained Timothy and others, right? So that they could have been duped about the existence of the most important leader in all of Christianity while people who were alive when Paul was alive is beyond the possibility of belief. So he's saying that because so many people talked to Jesus, his letters went all over the Christian world, his letters and copies of his letters, and we have copies of his letters that archaeologists have, and many of the things he did we have proof of. There is not a single example of an opponent of Christianity in the first 2 or 3 centuries who doubted his reality. It would have been like doubting that Seneca or Ovid or Cicero lived. Why? Because we have their writings. We have people who wrote about them. And you could read Cicero now. Bart Ehrman, one of the biggest critics of the reliability of the Bible, has debated unscholarly atheists who claim that Paul is not real and struggle to not laugh at his atheist friends for making the foolish and unfounded claim that Paul was not a real person. So here's what we know. Absolutely, Paul existed. Absolutely, he believed in his vision of Jesus. Absolutely, what he's writing down, he believed came from the living Spirit of Jesus Christ. And that's how we believe that Jesus appears to people all over the world. So 1 Corinthians 15:45, 1 Corinthians is written by Paul himself, right? And he says this, and so it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. The last Adam, Jesus Christ, became a life-giving spirit. And why does he write this? Because he meant the life-giving spirit of Jesus Christ. And he says, undoubtedly, this is true. So that's the beginning of Christianity, right? So the trouble is, if you ask atheists, go back. If you ask atheists, then they doubt the living Spirit of Jesus Christ. They say it can't be. Physics doesn't allow that to happen. I don't know why. There's no law of physics that says you can't have a spiritual body, right? So, here we go. Now, I thought I'd write this because this is just further evidence that is actually quite well known, very well written, and certifiably true as God's social experiment with the Roman Empire. This is in a memoir of the Roman emperor that Eusebius wrote after Constantine's death. A miraculous appearance is said to have come in Gaul long before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. That is, in this later version, by the way, Eusebius is the bishop who baptized Constantine, so he knew him personally. Constantine liked him and invited him to the Council of Nicaea and other kinds of experiences. In this later version, the Roman emperor had been pondering the misfortunes that befell, commanded to invoke the help of many different gods, and decided to seek divine aid in the forthcoming battle from the one God, right? The God of the Christian people. At noon, Constantine saw a cross of light imposed over the sun. Attached to it in Greek characters with the saying, "In this conquer." I'm not going to read the Latin. Not only Constantine, but the whole army saw the miracle. So, and this is it, the Kairos sign, and I'll show you why. That night, Christ appeared to the Roman emperor in a dream and told him to make a replica of the sign he had seen in the sky, which would be a sure defense in battle. So, what's interesting to this is all these things actually happened. We know they happened. Everybody's written them down, and this is what history is made out of, right? According to Eusebius, Constantine also had a dream that same night. In the dream, the Christ of God appeared to him with a sign which appeared in the sky and urged him to make himself a copy of the sign which had appeared in the sky and to use this as a protection against the attacks of the enemy, right? So this is it, the Kairos sign. X is for Christos, the Son of God, if you read that, and P is for peace, right? After Constantine, the Cairo became part of the official imperial insignia. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence demonstrating that the Cairo was emblazoned on the helmets of some late Roman soldiers. Coins and medallions minted during Emperor Constantine's reign also bore the Cairo sign. How did this take place? Why would the emperor make the Cairo sign and coins, put it on his soldiers' helmets and things like that, if he didn't really see Jesus? If he didn't really have this spiritual experience, why would this actually come into physical being without that experience? Does that make sense? So look at this. Before Constantine, and by the way, this is just before Constantine, the Emperor Diocletian was killing Christians. We heard all the stories, was killing them, hating them. They could not hold public office, all those kinds of things. Christians suffered from sporadic and localized persecutions over a period of 2.5 centuries. Their refusal to participate in the imperial cult was like Zeus and Jupiter and all. They didn't do those kinds of things. Was considered an act of treason, was thus punishable by execution. The most widespread official persecution was carried out by Diocletian beginning in 303, right? So just before Constantine, what's going on with the Christian church? They're getting killed and murdered and persecuted. They can't hold public office. So and here's the point. This is history. Only a miracle could save the Christians at this point, right? Let's see, during the Great Persecution, and by the way, it's called the Great Persecution, the emperor ordered Christian buildings and the homes of Christians torn down their sacred books collected and burned, and then murdering and killing Christians. So this is 303, just prior to Constantine. Christians aren't a powerful, strong, they're a very, very small, persecuted minority. How did Constantine find them then? Through this miracle. Christians were arrested, tortured, mutilated, burned, starved, and condemned to gladiatorial contests to amuse spectators. That's from the Wikipedia, so anybody, you can Google what happened to the Christians, right? So this is also from the Wikipedia, Constantine. Here's his Latin name, Flavius Valerius Constantinus. Also known as Constantine the Great, was Roman emperor from AD 306 to 337, right? So 303, Diocletian is killing all the Christians, destroying their churches, destroying their buildings, killing them. But 306, he comes in, and the first Roman emperor to convert to Christianity. He played a pivotal role in elevating the status of Christianity in Rome, decriminalizing Christian practice, and seizing Christian persecution in a period referred to as the Constantinian shift. This initiated the Christianization of the Roman Empire. Constantine is associated with the religio-political ideology known as Caesar Papism, which epitomizes the unity of church and state. He founded the city of Constantinople and made it the capital of the empire, which remained for over a millennium. So how did Christianity happen in Rome? Through this miracle of the vision of Constantine. Without that miracle, it's not possible. So what we're saying is, look, if anybody studies history, you have to recognize that there was some miraculous experience of Constantine being visited by the Spirit of Jesus Christ so that he changed everything in Rome. Yeah. And Christianity now became not popular. He used money, so patronage of the church. The ascension of Constantine was a turning point for early Christianity. After his victory, Constantine took over the role of patron of the Christian faith. He supported the church financially, had a number of basilicas built, granted privileges, exemption to certain taxes to clergy, promoted Christians to high-ranking offices, returned property confiscated during the Great Persecution of Diocletian, and endowed the church with land and other wealth. Between 324 and 330, Constantine built a new city, New Rome, Byzantium at the Bosporus, which would be named Constantinople. For him, unlike all Rome, the city began to employ overtly Christian architecture, contained churches within the city walls, and had no pre-existing temples from other religions. He began to destroy the other religious buildings and turn them into Christian churches. How could this happen just within 1 or 2 years of Diocletian killing everybody? There had to be some enormous incident in Constantine's life, and that's what Eusebius writes about. Jesus appeared to Constantine, saved him, made him emperor, and this happened. It was this vision and dream of Constantine was a major step in Christendom of Europe and eventually becoming the USA the most advanced, powerful, richest nations in the history of the earth. Isn't that true? But it comes from this point because if Constantine had not met Jesus, would any of these things have taken place? Probably not, right? So this is a significant step in Christianity and human history, was brought about by the intervention of the living Spirit of Jesus Christ, and it's written down. That's what's amazing to me. It's written down by Eusebius and then supported by all the evidence of Constantine changing Rome into a Christian country. Isn't that amazing? So that's why we say, if you're an atheist, how can you deny this experience? There's absolutely no other reason for this to take place except the intervention of Jesus Christ in the life of Constantine, which he told to Eusebius, who's a guy who acted as his own personal priest, right? Eusebius baptized him, counseled him into Christianity. Eusebius was a preacher and teacher of Christian theology. He wrote books on theology, and he's the one who taught Constantine Christianity. So we know he's real. We know Eusebius was real. We know Constantine was real, and we know this actually took place. Isn't that amazing? Yes. Okay, next. So that's what this means. The last Adam became a life-giving spirit. Not only could he appear to Paul, he could appear to Constantine and change the world. How about other changes? Here's another change. In the late 1700s, when William Wilberforce was a teenager, English traders raided the African coast on the Gulf of Guinea, captured between 35,000 and 50,000 Africans a year, shipped them across the Atlantic and sold them into slavery. It was profitable business that many powerful people had become dependent on. Listen to this. One published for the West Indies Trade wrote, "The impossibility of doing without slaves in the West Indies will always prevent this traffic being dropped. Will prevent this traffic from being dropped. The necessity, the absolute necessity then of carrying it on must, since there is no other, be its excuse." So the normal people said it's impossible to end the slave trade. It's impossible because all the economy of the colonies and other groups depend upon that. So in the late 1700s, the economics of slavery were so entrenched that only a handful of people thought anything could be done about it. That handful included who? William Wilberforce. And what happened to William Wilberforce? How did he get this idea? Let me show you. William Wilberforce meets the life-giving spirit of Jesus Christ. Wilberforce began to reflect deeply on his life, which led to a period of intense sorrow. "I am sure that no human creature could suffer more than I did for some months," he later wrote. His unnatural gloom lifted on Easter 1786 amidst a general chorus which all nature seems on such a morning to be swelling the song of praise and thanksgiving. He had experienced a spiritual rebirth. Right? You read his biography more deeply, but he found Jesus Christ on Easter morning. Does that sound familiar to us, unificationists? On Easter morning, he found Jesus. He decided to stop drinking alcohol, practice rigorous self-examination as befit, he believed, a serious Christian. So suddenly he became Christianized. He was a wealthy guy, a parliamentarian, part of the government. And then what did he do with his power? Here's what happened to him. William Wilberforce was a parliamentarian and man about town when he became convinced of the truth of Christianity. Upon his conversion, he thought he should withdraw from Parliament. But Pastor John Newton, author of the beloved hymn Amazing Grace, convinced him otherwise. So who's John Newton? John Newton's another guy who met Jesus personally and changed the world. Watch. Newton went to sea at a young age and worked on slave ships in the slave trade for several years. In 1745, he himself became a slave of Princess Paye, a woman of the Sherboro people, what is now Sierra Leone. He was rescued, returned to sea and the trade, becoming captain of several slave ships. After retiring from active seafaring, he continued to invest in the slave trade. Some years after experiencing a conversion to Christianity, Newton later renounced his trade and became a prominent supporter of abolitionism, and he's the one who met William Wilberforce, said you must use your political power to end slavery. So what happens? So Jesus is visiting these people. They're getting a spiritual awakening, becoming Christians. And what happens? This. Pastor John Newton, author of the beloved hymn Amazing Grace, convinced him otherwise. God had placed him in Parliament for some useful purpose, thought the wise old pastor who had been a slaver in his wild youth. In particular, two causes caught his attention. First, under the influence of Thomas Clarkson, he became absorbed with the issue of slavery. Later he wrote, "So enormous, so dreadful, so irremediable did the trade's wickedness appear that my own mind was completely made up for abolition. Let the consequences be what they would, I from this time determined I would never rest until I had effected this abolition," to make abolition real. So what happened? It worked. His anti-slavery efforts finally bore fruit in 1807. Parliament abolished the slave trade in the British Empire. So he would bring slaves and show the Parliament, these guys are smart, normal, wonderful human beings. You cannot do this. If you're Christians, you'll be condemned. You'll go to hell for enslaving all these people and doing all these evil things. He then worked to ensure the slave trade laws enforced and find that slavery in the British Empire was abolished. Wilberforce's health prevented him from leading the last charge, though he heard 3 days before he died that the final passage of the Emancipation Bill was ensured. So what happened? How does evil of slavery end in the world? By Jesus visiting John Newton and Wilberforce. Isn't that amazing? And by the way, this is written history. This is not, are we sure the Bible is true or not? Are we sure about? No, this is written down. It's actual history. The laws were changed. The governments were changed. People were freed based on Jesus visiting these people, getting this inspiration from God that we must do good. We must follow Matthew 25. That's the one, love your neighbor as yourself, etc., right? Not only that, the West Africa Squadron, also known as the Preventive Squadron, was a squadron of the British Royal Navy whose goal was to suppress the Atlantic slave trade by patrolling the coast of West Africa. Their goal was, even though England wasn't capturing slaves, pirates were. They would go capture slaves, bring them to the West Indies or the United States and sell them. But the English Navy decided we're not going to allow that to happen. Formed in 1808 after the British Parliamentary passed the Slave Trade Act of 1807, over the course of its operations, it managed to capture around 6% of the transatlantic slave ships and freed around 150,000 Africans between 1830 and 1865. Unfortunately, over 17,000 sailors died during this duty with the squadron, principally of disease, because where were they? They were in the West Indies. It's hot, it's hot, Central America. It's hot. There's mosquitoes, there's diseases, et cetera, et cetera. So this is what we call resurrection. It's not the physical resurrection of a physical body. It's a resurrection of the mind, heart, and spirit of human beings, and we call this the first, second, and third blessings of God, and they're happening through Jesus actually visiting people, lifting up their spirits. They're changing and saying, no, we will not be slavers anymore. Isn't that amazing? Yeah. And again, this is history. You can't ask, well, I don't know, was the Bible written, when was it? It had nothing to do with that. It has to do with the living spirit of Jesus meeting people, and they're writing, by the way. They're writing, yes, I met Jesus, and now I'm going to be against slavery. Right? We say this is the intervention of the life-giving spirit of Jesus Christ on humanity, and it works through certain people. It doesn't necessarily immediately start with the whole group. It starts with John Newton, then Wilberforce, then Clarkson, then the Parliament, then the Navy, then the Royal Navy, then finally the United States, et cetera, et cetera. So we say this is a resurrection on a national and international level. This is the direct intervention of the life-giving spirit of Jesus Christ on humanity through the person of William Wilberforce, and then the British Parliament, and then the British Navy, and et cetera, et cetera. So this is what's going on in the world, right? The world is changing. The accounts of these men who sailed in the West African Squadron only encouraged support for the anti-slavery initiative. So what's going on is now the whole of England likes the idea. So it starts with Newton, and then Wilberforce, and then the Parliament, then the Navy, and then all the English people begin to like it. The public eagerly followed up on the stories of the liberation of slaves by the Navy, and by the mid-19th century, around 25 ships and 2,000 sailors were based at the squadron station, though approximately that many also died while on duty with the squadron. Nevertheless, the job of a squadron member became a celebrated one that Brits back home commended with reverence and respect. So see how this grows? It doesn't happen in England immediately at once. One person. Sorry, it starts with one person, then two, then the Parliament, then the soldiers, then the Navy, then the whole of England says, yes, we hate slavery. Isn't that amazing? Yeah. But this is the pattern that God always works with. First it's Abraham, then it's Isaac, then it's Jacob, then it's the 12, then it's the 12 tribes, then it's Moses, and then it's the nation of Israel. It always works by growing. It doesn't happen just a whole nation suddenly changes. Right? And the reason I mention this is because this is where we're at. We wonder what's happening. Why doesn't the whole nation just accept what we believe? It's so obvious what we were believing. Well, why doesn't the whole nation just believe us? Sorry, it never works like that. We wish it would. We wish the president would just announce, like maybe one of the presidents someday will have a visitation by true parents, and then they'll announce, oh, we're Unification Church. You're where it's at. You were right all along. Amen. By the way, some of the crew members of the squadron were themselves African descent. By 1845, over 1,000 experienced African fishermen were involved. So not only the British, but then the Africans themselves became involved. See how it grows and spreads? But it starts with one or two people all the time. So why should we understand and share this? Because this is a real, visible experience with the life-giving spirit of Jesus Christ that has visual, measurable, beneficial effects on society. Right? Shouldn't atheists be happy there's no slavery? Unless they want to own slaves themselves, they should be great. This is wonderful news from the Christian world. Right? But they don't get it. They don't understand that. Also next, George Fox founded the Quaker movement and began with a vision of Jesus Christ. Historians mark 1652 as the beginning of the Quaker movement. One day Fox climbed up desolate Pendle Hill, believed to be a haunt of demons and spirits, and saw a people in white raiment coming to the Lord. The vision signified that proclaiming Christ's power over sin would gather people to the kingdom, and it did. By 1660, there were 50,000 followers. Wow. In 8 years. Which is, by the way, similar to the Unification Church. Reverend Moon got out of prison in 1951, came to Busan, 1952, by 1960, there were tens of thousands of members in Korea and Japan, right? Then he came in the United States in 1969. A few years later, there's like 10,000 members here, right? So we've also had growth, and that's what we're trying to do again. So here's why this is important. Quakers hated slavery. Much like the good Christians that helped Jews escape Germany during World War II, Quakers and other Christians helped African Americans escape slavery. This was called the Underground Railroad. And if you read Harriet Tubman's autobiography, you can understand how did she escape? She went to Quakers' homes. They're Quakers who would harbor ex-slaves and allow them to escape to Canada, which was slave-free. And the Quakers did this at the risk of their lives, right? And then we finally get to Lincoln rose in popularity as an abolitionist. When he was a senator running for the Senate, he said, we're going to end slavery by voting. Some people say, well, he didn't want to end slavery because he wouldn't start a war to end slavery. Well, nearly 1 million people were killed in the Civil War. He didn't want to do it because you know why? People just don't know this. They don't understand it. But because of the new states, New Mexico, California, who all entered as non-slave states, he understood he had enough representatives in those non-slave states to create an amendment by voting. And that's why the South seceded, because they knew it's over now. There's too many non-slave states. California was a non-slave state, New Mexico, and a few others. See? So then here's what happened. We say slavery was ended by Christians in Europe, England, and the USA, and elsewhere at the cost of hundreds of thousands of soldiers' lives. Some say Lincoln never intended to free the slaves. You would have to never read any of his speeches to believe that. So not true if it was. Why would he not reinstate slavery if he had won the war? So some people don't want to thank Lincoln for ending slavery. But he did mean to end slavery. He did finally end slavery. He did not want a war to do it, but he did end slavery. And let me make this point. The 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, abolition of slavery, signed into law by Republican President Abraham Lincoln. The 13th Amendment, by the way, 27 states had to ratify that amendment. It wasn't just Abraham Lincoln can write a note and then now there's no more slavery. 27 states had to agree with the 13th Amendment, and 28 states ratified the 14th Amendment. Because why? Because of this idea of Christianity making slavery an evil custom that we didn't want. Even the states said we don't want to be slave states. We're not going to deal with that business. It's too dirty. It's too horrible. In order to have slaves, you have to torture them. Or because they're not, everybody wants to do what they want to do, right? So the Christian message triumphed finally after 100 years, the Constitution finally fulfilled. So here's what we say about resurrection. We think this is actually the resurrection of the world, of the human race, by intervention of Jesus Christ, the life-giving Spirit. We're getting the life of love. That's what's going on. The human race is growing. It also means spiritual, emotional, intellectual, and willfulness to goodness, resurrection. That's what it means, because you guys won't have slaves, right? So, and this is an important part of the Divine Principle book. Why didn't Jesus, Peter, Paul end slavery? The atheists always say, why didn't Peter, James, and John just end slavery immediately? Number one, because they're being killed to death. You know, I mean, it's hard to do that when people are persecuting you. We say because resurrection happens by stages. Because everything in God's universe grows by stages. The universe grew by stages. The earth grew by stages. All plants start from a seed, then a seedling, then a young plant, then the mature plants. Resurrection also happens by stages. Human beings grow from a single-celled zygote in your mother's womb to a fetus, to an infant, to a child, to adolescent, to teenager, to adult, to a mature adult, right? And then you go to heaven. And then resurrection happens by stages based upon the foundations of faith and love. And this is a really important part of Divine Principle. God's power can be expressed only based on faith and obedience of human beings. If there's no faith of the human beings, God, remember Jesus said, I went to my home, I could not work miracles. Even though I have the power of God, I can't work miracles because there's no faith. When there's no faith. So what's going on is, what happens to the Christians because of the betrayal of Jesus, so many things, so much lack of faith, then Jesus went to the cross, and by the absolute faith of Christians who were being persecuted and murdered and killed, and all these things that happened to them, their foundation of faith allowed God to witness directly to Constantine. That's what we think, right? Because so many Christians were killed, then so many Romans could be converted, right? The Christians paid the price, absolute faith to Jesus, but then God could then win millions and millions of Romans, right? So aren't we going through persecution? We've gone through a lot of persecution, right? What does that mean? Eventually, that will be a trade-off for God's kingdom, and God will witness to many, many millions of Americans. So here's how it works from Jesus' time. It goes like this. Knowledge, external knowledge is growing. Pythagoras, Euclid, Aristotle gives us hydrology. Reformation or Protestants did away with the Inquisition. So the Catholic Church from the Roman Church grew and grew and grew, but went off center. Right? In the 12th, 13th, 14th, they created the Inquisition, which tortured, killed, mutilated Jews, non-Christians, Huguenots, who were French Protestants. Who does Bob Millar always write about? Wycliffe was persecuted. Huff? Was that Huff? Huss? Huss. The Romanian? No, not Hess. He was different. Anyhow, they persecuted anybody who translated. For example, there are people who are translating the Bible into the vernacular of the people, into German or Hungarian or English. Wycliffe translated. And they would be persecuted by the Catholics because they said, no, it has to remain Greek. And only we, Catholic priests, can read the Bible, right? But that changed with the Protestant Reformation and then the printing press, and then Luther translated the Bible into the vernacular people, into German, and then other people into French, Wycliffe into English and Scottish. So now the whole world began to read the Bible, and so Christianity changed, and the Protestant Reformation ended the Inquisition, right? There's no more Inquisition after that. Protestants said no. So based on this act of faith of the Protestants, Galileo creates what we call metrology. That is the measurement of what we call truth. And that is the beginning of the science, right? René Descartes, analytical geometry, Isaac Newton, modern physics, gravity. So all this is happening based on the Reformation. So the Reformation, the faith of the Protestants, allows God to work His Spirit through all these people to change us, to create an industrial revolution that saves billions of lives all over the world. Aren't there 8 billion human beings living now? Isn't that a miracle? Where does it come from? We believe it comes from the Protestant Reformation. God can now bless people because of the faith of millions upon millions of Christians, right? So, the above stories of Jesus' personal intervention in human history are evidence that the explanation in the Divine Principle chapter, the consummation of human history and progress towards the kingdom of heaven on earth, is in fact the truth, is in fact how it's supposed to work. God is working to build the kingdom of heaven on the earth and is accomplishing it. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, is why these things are taking place. This isn't just a prayer, it's a prophecy. God is prophesying, I will build the kingdom of heaven on earth. And it is happening on earth, and it is happening in our lifetimes. Isn't that amazing? Yeah. So Jesus is building his kingdom on earth, century after century, person after person, miracle after miracle. Now, there's a book called Victory of Reason, How Christianity Led to Freedom, Capitalism, and Western Success in the Whole World by Rodney Stark. You should read this. This is like the history I'm giving you. Partially it's in here, partially it's the Divine Principle book, but he could see how God worked through all these people. European universities, for example, why is the 20th century different than all the other centuries? Because Christians built universities. Not only are they theologians in slavery, but they built universities, and universities created scientists. Where did Newton go to learn physics? Cambridge University, Trinity College it's called. Who created it? Protestant Christians. And so if you read this, it says European universities date from the founding of the University of Bologna in 1088 or the University of Paris. The original medieval universities arose from what? The Roman Catholic Church schools. Their purposes included training professionals, scientific investigation, improving society, and teaching critical thinking and research. That's why the 21st century is different, or the 20th century is different than all the centuries before us, because Christians made universities that shared knowledge, multiplied knowledge to the whole world. Isn't that amazing? Historically, the Bologna University, founded in 1088, is considered the mother of European universities. In the 19th century, a committee of historians led by Giosuè Carducci traced the founding of the university back to 1088, which would make it the oldest continuously operating university in the whole world. Isn't that amazing? Yeah. You know, Japanese people have great universities, right? You heard of Waseda University in Japan, right? One of the great technical universities in Japan. Yeah. Reverend Moon went there. Do you know when it was founded? 1888. 1,000 years after the Bologna University was created, the Waseda University was invented. 1,000 years later. That's why the West is different. The side effect of the end of slavery is the Industrial Revolution. Is that interesting? Bible study made people literate. The Christian invention of universities brought not only religion but also mathematics, history, science to Western civilization. The end of slavery meant you now had to pay people to make things. You couldn't just beat them and make them farm or do. You had to pay people to make things. So because you had to pay people, then people learned valuable skills, and valuable skills, they got more money, and then they industrialized things because it's cheaper to buy a machine. Believe me, I'm a machine tool technical salesman. That's what I do for a living. It's cheaper to buy machines than it is to pay people. So people were paid to invent things. Innovation made better profits, and skilled labor made people with skills more valuable, and that changed the world. This led to the invention of steel plows, harvesting equipment, steam engines, etc. That's why we can now feed 8 billion people on earth, because of Christianity. Isn't that amazing? Yeah. And it's all written down. We know exactly why, step by step, what happened. So denying Christ or denying the influence of Jesus is just a giant mistake. It makes no logical sense. So, this is an important part for us. God's power based upon human faith and love is continuing to build the kingdom of heaven on earth. God isn't stopping tomorrow. He's not stopping today. So long as we have faith, so long as we continue to have faith, then the growth of human beings will continue. Growth of human society. And since true parents have been victorious, God's will continue. Right? We say Jesus not only intervened in St. Paul and Peter and all those guys, he came into the life of Reverend Moon, who's why we're here today, isn't it? Yes. And by the way, he was true father and true mother were successful in blessing. How many marriages were blessed? Millions now. So instead of, it's true, Reverend Mrs. Moon and us following Reverend face some persecution. But on the whole, they're tremendously victorious, right? So I was always called to love God first by Reverend Mrs. Moon. God told me, taught us, didn't you? He taught you, love God first. Right? That's the first thing you're supposed to do. They always worship God, even at 5 a.m. Remember we used to get up at 5 a.m. to go to church? Or midnight. Every day we lived with them. I was a driver for them in LA and absolutely attest that their schedule was unbelievable. None of us young people could keep up with true mother and true father. They're always praying, blessing, teaching, doing all kinds of things. They were, by the way, they were nice to me and to everyone. There was not a single story ever, anywhere on earth, that Reverend Mrs. Moon ever hurt or threatened anyone. No matter how much we were persecuted, did they ever threaten anybody? Not a single person ever. There's no rumor. Even people who hate our guts don't say, well, we tried to hurt somebody, right? That is the standard of Paul. That's the standard of Jesus Christ. That's the standard of God they live by. They have used their fortune for peace. Middle East peace of the Washington Times, the end of the Soviet Union was done bloodlessly. Reverend Mrs. Moon, Reagan, Pope John Paul II worked to end the Soviet Union, and they did without killing anybody. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Isn't that proof of Jesus' intervention in the life of Reverend Mrs. Moon? I think it is. They taught me to love my wife and kids, friends, and even enemies. They love God even after the death of their children. True parents succeeded in life. They were not killed. They gathered hundreds of thousands of disciples all over the world, in 180 nations all over the world. There's churches preaching, working. Like Jacob and Esau, like Jesus, they forgave their mortal enemies. Specifically, they forgave Gorbachev of the Soviet Union and Kim Il-sung. They went there to forgive them. Isn't that amazing?
Yes.
Kim Il-sung is the one who put a mother and grandma in jail and put Reverend Moon in jail for 2.8 years and tortured him. That was Kim Il-sung. And he still went to forgive them, right? It is amazing to me. So to me, this is my testimony. Reverend Mrs. Moon have been representative of Christianity all my life. Jesus is still a life-giving spirit. Nevertheless, Jesus does work through his agents on earth, and that's them. So, 1, Reverend Mrs. Moon revealed God's heart to us, Jesus' heart to us, the real story of Jesus' mission and the results of Jesus' mission, and why it takes so long to build the kingdom of heaven on earth. Reverend Mrs. Moon have explained Jesus' tears at Gethsemane, which nobody explained. They always said Jesus cried at Gethsemane because he was just scared of the torture of crucifixion. He never was scared. He said, this is my mission. I'm going to do this. I'm going to ransom everybody, trade my life for the value of God's children. He explained Jesus' tears over Jerusalem, the consummation of human history and the progress towards the kingdom of heaven on earth, the true nature of God, that God is a true parent, not just an old man in the sky. Isn't that amazing? That love in our families, familyism is the road to the kingdom of heaven. So this is what we say. However, Father Moon has ascended to heaven. Mother Moon is now 80 years old. She wants to leave a temple of faith and love after she ascends. A place where we can pray and grow closer to God. A place where we can walk with God and speak to God, as we should have in the Garden of Eden. I believe that makes sense to me, right? So this is called the Chunwan Gung, and this is just the outside. The inside, the inner part isn't built yet. They're building it. That's why they're asking for donations. That's why they're asking us to participate in building this. And then they're going to invite everybody to come and visit it. Again, a sort of central meeting place to meet, walk, and talk with God. This is based upon 2,000 years of Christian faith and love. How could we build this? Can't just build it. That's why wasn't built in Jesus' lifetime. It wasn't built then. Because it takes all this time, faith, love, sacrifice to make it. Right? And of course, this is not the last temple. This is the first one of many that will take place all over the earth, where God will be honored and people will, and by the way, people of all nations will honor it. Every flag of every country is represented. Every race is represented here. And that's what we want to do, right? That's how we want to live. All the growth of Western civilization is based upon conditions of faith and substance. So let's participate with prayer. People, second gen couples, ministers couples are actually going here next April. And even Jesus cannot work miracles where there's no faith. That's why our faith is essential, right? So let's offer prayer, attendance, and a financial offering as a real substantial faith offering, right? That's what we're doing. April 2025, opening the Chunwan Gung will unleash a zeitgeist of spirit. That means, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people. We are actually working on building the kingdom of heaven on the earth. That's what this is all about. That yes, Constantine helped, yes, Wilberforce did, but it's still working. It hasn't. We aren't completely in the kingdom of heaven yet. We are feeding 8 billion people on earth, but that's not enough. Without true love, it really won't work. Amen? Amen? That's what we're building. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed that.